Hey there, fellow leftists. Remember that time when Lauren Southern went out into the Mediterranean and shot flares at refugee boats? I don't. That never happened. Plenty of people might have said it happened. Fuck, back when I was a 60 sub seedling, I said that happened. And then by contrast, get yourself detained in Italy for shooting flares at refugee boats. What a blockhead. But consider this my personal growth video, because I'm here to set things straight. Lauren Southern did not go out into the sea with nets and hooks trying to drown refugees like some kind of Dora the Nazi explorer, and she absolutely did not shoot any flares at the boats. But so you might be wondering, why am I talking about the boats? That was 4 years ago. Why am I arguing with a version of Lauren Southern that no longer exists? Do leftists not believe in rehabilitation and grumble? Well, yes, I do, and don't worry. Because I'm only bringing up Lauren Southern's past after hearing what she's had to say about it today. She's had the question of the boats brought up to her quite a few times since she came back to YouTube. I've listened to her explanations, and if I thought this was a version of Lauren that no longer exists, I probably wouldn't be making this video. But before we get into that, let's talk about what happened. Part 1. The boats. In the early 2010s, the first waves of an unprecedented refugee crisis started to appear in Europe. The aftermath of the Arab Spring had led to the collapse of several regimes in northern Africa, Syria had plunged into a civil war, and conditions in neighbouring countries were quickly deteriorating. The result was millions of displaced people, the vast majority of whom decided to go to Europe. Okay, that's not true, most of them actually went to these countries, but Europe did take a good few. Out of all the main entry points to Europe, the most deadly was the central Mediterranean route from Libya to Italy. From 2012 to 2013, the number of crossings along this route had almost quadrupled. The people crossing were typically doing so on cheap, overcrowded boats provided by human smugglers, and as the crossings increased, so too did the number of deaths. On October 3rd, 2013, the crisis made headlines after more than 360 people drowned in a shipwreck that was within sight of the Italian island of Lampedusa. The Italian president called the event a slaughter of innocents, and later that month, the Italian government launched a rescue mission called Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum was what we'll describe as the Chad operation. They had 900 staff, an amphibious assault carrier, 2 frigates, 2 submarines, helicopters, and drones. In its first year, they rescued over 150,000 people, arrested 350 smugglers, and confiscated 9 ships. However, the operation was also expensive, and in typical EU fashion, none of the other member states were willing to support it. Along with that, EU arrangements made it difficult for asylum seekers to move past Italy, meaning they were becoming quickly concentrated in the southern coast. The backlash was a rise of anti-immigrant sentiment and the idea that Mare Nostrum was serving as a pull factor, encouraging illegitimate migrants to make the journey over when they otherwise wouldn't have. The operation was terminated at the end of 2014 and then replaced by a smaller body that covered a lot less space. The idea was that this would reduce people's willingness to make the dangerous journey over. And then, in the early months of 2015, this happened. You see those big spikes there? That's the death rate in 2015, just after Mare Nostrum was ended. In April of that year, a breaking point was reached when 2 boats capsized and over 1,000 people drowned. As a response to the rising death rate, the gap in search and rescue was filled by non-government organizations who sent out 4 vessels in May. By 2017, they were the biggest rescue actors in the Mediterranean. But the NGOs were immediately viewed with suspicion. Unlike Mare Nostrum, they didn't have the power to arrest smugglers or to confiscate boats. All they could do was rescue people, to which increasingly right-wing governments in southern Europe said, "F that." NGOs were branded as sea taxis and vice smugglers. They were accused of encouraging human trafficking and even in some cases, of directly colluding with smugglers. Several criminal investigations were launched, ships were frequently impounded, and the Italian government in particular started using policy initiatives to restrict the movement of rescue missions. For some people on the right, this wasn't enough. Enter Lauren Southern. In 2017, a French anti-immigrant youth group called Generation Identity decided to play their own role in policing the Mediterranean. They set up a project called Defend Europe. They had a website which had a mission statement describing the migrant wave as an invasion, and they set up a fundraiser for travel costs, ships, and research. Wait, is that the 4chan logo? Okay. Their goal was to protest NGO boats trying to enter Europe and ultimately to start a rescue mission of their own. By rescue, I mean they wanted to take anyone they found back to Libya, and more on that later. In the summer of 2017, a group of GI members took a small boat out to the Mediterranean where they tried to obstruct an NGO vessel called the Aquarius. The group was joined by a young Lauren Southern who live-streamed the event whilst holding up a hand flare and chanting the words, "No more illegal immigration."
So this is a boat called the Aquarius that has been illegally bringing in migrants from the Libyan Ocean for the last while. And they're just heading out again to bring in more illegal migrants, and we are going to stop them. No way they're coming in here. No way they're bringing in more illegals. No more! No more! Illegal immigration! No more! No more! Illegal immigration!
After the event, they celebrated on a live stream and even asked 4chan to help them in the future.
What we want to do, we want to defend Europe from this invasion of migrants and illegals. And we need now, in fact, the help of the 4chan, Paul, Otis, all the people on the PCs, you on the internet and we on the sea. Together we can stop this.
Absolutely. So Paul, we're gonna need your help now.
So at first glance, this is pretty fucked up, right? Running around like some kind of self-appointed border patrol officer, trying to obstruct a boat that had rescued over 10,000 people. Of all the things Lauren could have to regret about her past, I'd imagine this would come out on top. But that isn't where the story ended. A year later, the Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini refused entrance to the Aquarius. Pay attention to him, by the way, he's important. The vessel, which had over 600 people on board, was temporarily stranded before it was finally accepted by the Prime Minister of Spain. Although no one had been formally charged at this point, the NGO was repeatedly accused of colluding with human traffickers, and now that they weren't allowed to dock in Italy, they were in a grey zone. Then, with a series of contradictory statements from various parties, the Aquarius had its registration removed and would no longer operate as a rescue vessel. At the end of 2018, the Italian authorities went one step further and called for the Aquarius to be impounded, stating that 24 of the ship's crew members, including their captain, were put under investigation for trafficking and illegal management of waste. Naturally, the NGO's head of emergencies described these allegations as defamatory and unfounded, so don't worry, we will find out which one of these sides is lying. But first, we should see what Lauren had to say about it. In 2018, she made a video celebrating the deflagging of the Aquarius, and her reasoning was more or less the same as it is now. In a very recent conversation with a streamer called Booksmarts, she gave off quite a few explanations, so there's plenty to work with here. Part 2. Trafficking.
So why the Aquarius was under investigation and why it was ultimately shut down and impounded for illegal actions is, first of all, they were under investigation by the Italians for going on the coast and working as a trafficking service, not a rescue service.
Back in the summer of 2017, a group called Generation Identity held a campaign to protest NGO boats colluding with traffickers and sneaking illegal immigrants into Sicily and, I guess, all over Europe.
This is one of the most common accusations laid against NGOs, and here's how it works. Typically, people in Northern Africa would pay smugglers for a boat to take them across the Mediterranean. Most of these boats are little more than rubber dinghies, which aren't considered safe for the open sea. Once they were at sea, the migrants would then make a distress call which has to be answered by a vessel in the area. The people in the dinghy are then taken on board the vessel where they can continue their journey safely. This is how a standard rescue mission works, and from the perspective of the rescuers, all of this is perfectly legal. What isn't legal is if NGO workers are caught directly communicating or colluding with smugglers. Even when they are seen, the NGO workers are instructed not to interact with them and definitely not to confront them. It turns out smugglers can be kind of aggressive. Now, Lauren is correct that the Aquarius crew members were accused of colluding with smugglers. Salvini made a fairly direct reference to this when he closed Italy's ports to them. But what she doesn't say is, this was never proven. And while I have you there, every single investigation into criminal activity by NGOs in the Central Mediterranean has so far ended with an acquittal. 5 investigations were closed without any formal charges, and so far there has only been 1 that will go to trial. No, not the Aquarius, a German vessel called Jugendrettet, and they aren't even being accused of helping smugglers. Their charge is that on one of their missions they potentially rescued migrants who were not in a situation of distress. That's it. The closest they've come to a conviction was against a captain who was found guilty of registration issues and then later acquitted in the appeal trial. And wait, there's more. It turns out that a couple of the investigations weren't even opened because of criminality. In at least 2 cases, Italian prosecutors impounded vessels which had been stranded after Salvini refused to let them dock. One of them had been at sea for 19 days, and according to the prosecutors, Italy had been breaking international law by leaving people stranded for so long. They chose to impound the ships just so they could get the migrants to shore. Wait, so that's it? The accusations are completely baseless? They're just a tool used by right-wing politicians so they can impound ships, smear the rescuers, and hinder their fundraising, all just to stop refugees from arriving? Well, yeah. Except, there is in fact one person who does claim to have definitive evidence against NGOs. Incidentally, that one person is none other than Lauren Southern. What? Yep. Lauren Southern has a video on her channel called Undercover, exposing NGO smugglers in Greece. Now that is huge. Because if that's true, it would mean that she managed to find something that all the authorities missed. Let's investigate this. Part 2.5. Lauren Southern is a lying hack who lies about things and calls it journalist. Sorry, that's poisoning the well. We should. Okay. Part 2.5. A review of Lauren Southern's journalism. So this video is a couple of years old, but it's extremely relevant to the topic, and it's also a teaser segment from her Borderless documentary, which Lauren wants more people to see.
So that was the project I spent the most money on, which was very humanizing of migrants, but the thing is, none of my critics watch it, and that was 3 years ago.
You're welcome, Lauren. The story being covered is about a Greek NGO founder called Panos Moraitis, who is accused of helping people smugglers as well as money laundering, espionage, and forgery. Before giving himself up to the police in Lesbos, Panos was away from the island and considered to be in hiding. But before the police got to him, Lauren wanted to get a hold of him for an interview. Look, this is impressive, isn't it? There's an evidence board, there's Panos in hiding, and these two are going to find him before he's taken into custody.
And they're linked to Doctors Without Borders. I mean, they're hugely connected, but it all leads back to Panos.
So how are we going to get him?
I'm going to reach out to the rest of the RCR members who haven't been arrested and who are still active, see if we can get a connection to him, and then we can maybe arrange a call, maybe a meeting, but I think that's so unlikely given that he's in hiding from the police.
Well, we can try.
We can try.
I mean, the police have already found a few of their other high-profile members. You can't be nowhere.
Then it goes to 1 week later. They still haven't found him yet, but now they might have a lead.
You know, all volunteers have resigned in fear of being arrested. There are very limited people that can represent the organization, and these operate off the record at the moment while they are trying
Right. Here's the problem. The date on that laptop is the 10th of October. The first scene was 1 week earlier, so the 3rd, which is weird because the guy they're looking for turned himself in on the 19th of September. So they're talking about trying to find him 3 weeks after he was already found. What? None of this is real. Everything they're apparently trying to figure out was already available in the press when they recorded this. This isn't investigative journalism. This is a film set with 2 wallopers pretending to be investigative journalists. I feel like we should watch a bit more of this just so we can enjoy Lauren's acting.
Okay,
So-
contact them right away and let's see where we can
Yeah.
go from this, because that would be
Because
amazing.
Even if we don't get this former person, we've still got the press person, so we can probably...
We've got someone that is in contact with Panos.
Maybe he's even
We've
met
had-
Panos. Okay,
yeah.
let's do it.
Good morning.
That's right.
Yeah, no, this is worth it, I promise. So, ERCI have WhatsApped me. I've been talking to them for the past few hours. They've said that we can actually get an interview directly with Panos, not even on Skype, on the phone, in
With
person.
Panos?
In person. Yeah, the guy who's behind all of this. So, he's arriving in Mytilene in 2 hours, which is, he's basically, I've got this shipping app, which they've given me an update to, and they've said that he is here, on the ship here, which is going to come around.
Right. Here's the problem. Kalen, that's his name, is waking Lauren up just after midnight, presumably an hour after that laptop scene, to say that the guy who turned himself in 3 weeks ago was going to turn himself in the next 2 hours. Are we following? So it's midnight, sometime after October the 10th, and Panos is arriving in Lesbos at 3 in the morning.
Is security up?
Yeah, he said he can do it. He said actually we should probably leave like now,
Yeah.
because we want to get there really early, speak to the lawyer, and just figure out like a route onto the ship.
Okay, so we have to leave now. So why is it broad daylight when they arrive at the boat? And why is this definitely real text exchange happening at 8 in the morning? The strangest thing is, they did interview this guy. It's just that the lead up to that interview completely changes in her Borderless documentary. Instead of happening in Charlie's detective bunker, it just happens over the phone.
Apparently there's going to be a passenger ship docking in Lesbos this morning with the leader of ERCI on it, this Panos Moraitis guy.
Yeah, he's the one that's in hiding from police for the last little bit.
Fucking... Why would you do that? The interview itself is pretty underwhelming. He just says what his charges are and that he denies them, but here comes the expose. After this interview, when the cameras went off, they claimed, and I emphasize the word claimed here, to have met with Panos' lawyer where they secretly recorded this.
They said that we were actually money laundering unknown sums of money. And the press in Greece said like 500 million. And in reality it was 500,000 euro, which if you engage with NGOs, you know it's a small amount of money actually, for 3 years. Wow. But we were laundering it.
So I've just gone back to watch some of the footage, the interview we did with Panos, the head of ERCI, and I'm listening to the undercover recording we have now. Panos denied all of these allegations to the police and publicly. He said they were partaking in no money laundering at all, and I'm pretty sure I just heard his lawyers say to us on tape they laundered $500,000. I mean, we have to send this to police. This could actually impact the court case.
That is so convincing. Okay, here's the problem with alternative media. People like Lauren, people like me even, are not accountable to anyone. We can just say whatever the fuck we want. People in mainstream journalism, whatever you think about them, can get fired for like making up quotes. Boris Johnson, guy who gets away with everything, was fired for making up a quote. I, on the other hand, can just waltz in here and say that I spoke to a refugee in Paris and he said, "Yes, I am a refugee. I met with Lauren Southern in 2018. She told me to go back to my country and then proceeded to shoot me in the balls with a, how you say it, flare gun." I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is huge. This could really impact the Hell, Lauren. Even if this really is Panos' lawyer, the lack of verification is still stunning. We're never told what the lawyer's name is. We don't know if the phrase, "we were laundering it," is him admitting to something or just describing the charges. There's no clarifying question from the interviewer, and the wider context of the conversation is completely absent. Panos and his colleagues were released on bail in December 2018, so no, he wasn't still in custody when Borderless came out. In 2020, Amnesty International published a breakdown of the investigation against Panos and his colleagues. Look, they even addressed the money laundering charge, which apparently relates to a fundraiser done by 2 of Panos' volunteers. Hey, it looks like they haven't uncovered any wrongdoing so far. I guess they never received that definitely real confession that Lauren is definitely sincerely reacting to here. Hey, Lauren? Hey? Honestly, I think it would be in Lauren's interest to just concede the point about trafficking, especially since one of the groups that was investigated for trafficking was none other than Generation Identity. Really, in July 2017, barely 2 months after Lauren's stunt, a group of Defend Europe activists were deported from Cyprus after they arrived on a vessel with 21 Sri Lankans, 5 of whom ended up claiming asylum. The GI activists were accused of giving out false documents, but were released for a lack of evidence. Who says The Guardian doesn't do both sides, eh? Coming back to the Aquarius, they were already acquitted of a €200,000 fine that the Italian government tried to seize from their NGO. As for their ongoing investigation, let's look at that. Part 3. 10 tons of HIV. So it looks like we're clear on smuggling charges, but that still leaves the primary accusation against the Aquarius: the mismanagement of toxic waste.
The whole ship and operation was just operating illegally, which is why it was shut down. They were dropping toxic waste in the Mediterranean. I think it had like HIV on it. I think it was like tons of it, 10 tons of it. It was crazy.
10 tons of HIV.
So these were
that's crazy.
HIV infected like clothing and stuff. They
I'm
were dumping it
messing with
into it. You can look this up. This is all, yeah.
Well, don't mind if I do. I do wonder why she brought this up, because there was no mention of toxic waste before 2018, which kind of suggests she was looking for a post hoc justification, but oh well. In any case, Lauren is being conservative here. It was actually 24 tons. This was another one of Salvini's claims against the Aquarius, and where do you start? First of all, I'm not sure why she thinks it was dumped in the sea. As far as I've been able to find, the waste was handed over to local authorities in containers labelled as special waste, which would just be standard procedure. The problem was that apparently some of the contents should have been labelled as toxic waste. The toxic waste they were referring to was the discarded clothes of refugees who had been rescued. According to Salvini and the prosecutors, the clothing had been contaminated not just with HIV, but also with meningitis and tuberculosis. Despite the fact that none of these diseases can be transmitted on clothes. F***ing hell! Okay. You can't get HIV from clothes, or from phones, toilet seats, spoons, or cups, in case anyone needed to know. Tuberculosis is spread from the air and can't be transmitted through clothes, and meningitis is transferred directly from the nose and throat and can't be carried on clothes. This is the investigation that the Italian authorities persisted with, by the way. So not only did Lauren try to use this to justify her actions after the fact, she also seems to have been putting a strange amount of trust in someone who invented AIDS burqas. And Lauren definitely knows who Salvini is. She follows him on Twitter, and then she also mentioned him in her Vindicated video.
Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini blocked the ship from docking at its ports, saying, "From today, Italy will start to say no to human trafficking and no to the business of illegal immigration." I didn't even stop the boat. GI didn't stop the boat. We didn't touch it. And the Italian government is doing exactly that. And what are you guys gonna do? Are you gonna call the government enforcing its laws terrorists?
Well, terrorist, that's a bit strong, but remember I told you about migrants being stranded after the port closures and how some prosecutors thought that might be illegal? Well, it turns out Salvini went on trial this month because leaving people stranded at sea for 2.5 weeks could potentially be classed as kidnapping. And that's not even the first time he's been in trouble with the law, so yeah, that guy. Part 4. Illegal immigration. Okay, so I think it's safe to assume that Lauren and definitely Generation Identity did not try to stop the boat because of some deep-seated concern for trafficking or tuberculosis trousers. The real thing she emphasized both back then and now was illegal immigration. That was the thing they were chanting after all.
No more! No more! Illegal immigration! No more! No more! Illegal immigration!
But in a lot of cases, even the reasonable lefties, their problem with me is something that I'm not going to be able to apologize for. Because they think the problem inherently, like, all the context with the boat and shit, they think the problem is that I'm against illegal immigration, and I still am.
Now, it is technically true that turning up to a country unannounced on a dinghy boat or a rescue vessel is illegal. The problem is, the framing here is very misleading. Because if this isn't a proper channel, the question becomes, what else is a refugee supposed to do? Like, if you're having to flee war or persecution or a failed state, you can't really be expected to just grab a visa and fly over. Given that the death rate in the central Mediterranean is 1 in 50 on a good year, this journey is mostly a last resort. That's kind of the point of being a refugee. After watching quite a bit of Lauren's content, I noticed she makes legal arguments quite a lot, but she never mentions international laws on immigration. Probably because it would completely contradict her position. For example, the UN Convention on Refugees specifically makes an exception, stating that refugees are allowed to enter the country illegally and that the contracting state is obligated to hear their case. In case you noticed it, I should also explain what they mean by coming directly there. The wording here often gets misunderstood, but directly is only a reference to whether or not they settled in a previous state. And contrary to popular belief, refugees have no obligation to claim asylum in the first safe country they arrived in. I know that fact might be upsetting to some people, but really it makes sense. As the UN put it themselves, forcing people to stay in the first safe country puts an arbitrary and disproportionate burden on whatever country happens to be next door. For example, if a civil war breaks out in Scotland, then I'm sorry, but you can't just expect me and 3 million other wankers to go and live in fucking England. That's just not fair on anyone. The only possible exception to this rule is the Dublin Agreement for EU member states, which doesn't really force people to stay in the first safe country, but it can sometimes undermine their asylum claim if they don't. So the people arriving in Europe are acting within their rights. But I know there are some tentacles that Lauren can grow for this argument. Part 4.3. Economic migrants. I mean, this one is basically mainstream at this point. They're not refugees, they're economic migrants. In her older video, Lauren even claimed to have pretty strong backing for that position.
These ships had been portrayed in the media as helping and saving drowning refugees. And of course, the media completely neglected the research by both the UN and the EU, which confirmed Generation Identity's position that these were economic illegal migrants from non-refugee nations that were being trafficked and not saved.
So I don't know if this was what the UN or the EU said. She hasn't put any sources, and the closest I could find to it was an article from UN Dispatch, which said, some of the migrants aboard the Aquarius are certainly economic migrants, but initial processing in both France and Spain revealed that many were likely legitimate asylum seekers who have the legal right to seek asylum. And then it goes on to attack the politicians who make all the same arguments Lauren does. So, not much of an endorsement there, really. Now, you might have noticed I've been using the words refugee and migrant kind of interchangeably. And that's because the people arriving on the boats are really a bit of both. It is absolutely true that not everyone arriving in Europe gets their claim accepted. In 2020, about 40% of the claims were accepted first time, and then a further 29% of appeals and reviews were accepted. Still, that's quite a lot of people with unsuccessful claims. We'll get into some of the reasons for that in a minute. But the real question is, what exactly is an NGO supposed to do about this? If some of the people they rescue have legitimate asylum claims and others don't, how are they supposed to know that? Well, they're not, because that isn't their job. Even if they wanted to, they have neither the means nor the right to assess people's immigration status. All they can do is rescue people and help them complete their journey. And Lauren has some questions about that too. Part 4. Safe ports.
Maritime laws are that if anyone is near a boat that is drowning, any ships out in the Mediterranean, you have to go and save them. NGO or not, you have to go and help them. And then when you follow maritime law, you have to take them to the closest port of safety.
Right, so she is at least correct that states and NGOs are obligated to rescue people in distress. Awesome. She's almost correct about them having to go to the nearest safe port, but not quite. The term used in UN guidelines is the next port of call, and as they say themselves, there are a number of possibilities here. It can often be the nearest safe port, but as they say, the safety and dignity of those rescued and the crew must be the overriding consideration. This is where it gets a bit difficult because not every country has the same opinion on what counts as a safe port. The EU couldn't even agree on whether or not Mali was a safe country despite them having an FGM rate of 91%. Ugh. Hungary has a list that seems to exclude US states that still carry the death penalty, which is funny. In 2018, Germany was trying to declare Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria as safe countries, whilst the EU rejected this idea, which was probably the right call given that Tunisia still doesn't even have asylum legislation, and Algeria just recently expelled over 3,000 migrants to Niger without due process. Spain does consider Morocco a safe port, but that doesn't really matter here because Moroccan waters were further away from the Aquarius. No law was being broken here. What I find really weird is that she also suggested Libya as a safe port.
And working as a trafficking service, not a rescue service. So instead of bringing them to the closest port in Libya and Morocco, they were accused of bringing them to Spain, which is clearly what was happening, or Spain or Italy.
Hey, Lauren, I don't expect you to know this. You only went and made a documentary about the whole thing. But there might be a couple of problems with sending rescued people to Libya. You know, Libya, the country that's only gone and had 2 civil wars in the last 10 years. Incidentally, one of the only countries for which the UN had to write a standalone press release emphatically saying it couldn't be considered a safe port. Look, they even stress the point. Commercial vessels must not be directed to bring rescued passengers back to Libya. Now, she did say this in a free-flowing conversation, but it wasn't an accident. Sending rescuees to Libya was also the intention of Generation Identity. She was told this was their plan.
And we also say if we, for example, see migrants who are actually in danger, we'll of course rescue and save them, but we will bring them back to the Libyan coast.
And hey, it turns out they weren't even alone in thinking this. There's also at least one prominent politician who thinks Libya has safe ports and can be seen as a trustworthy country. Oh look, it's this guy again. You know, maybe this is why so many people were struggling with their asylum claims. Maybe the threshold for refugee status is being set a little too high if countries in civil war are being described as safe ports. Maybe. Of course, Salvini would have to say that, because in 2017, Italy signed a memorandum of understanding where they gave financial support to the Libyan Coast Guard in exchange for them intercepting refugees and taking them back to Libya. And if it's really just the law that Lauren's concerned about, you'd think she'd be against this given that it would directly violate international laws against the refoulement of refugees. After being returned to Libya, refugees were reported to have faced arbitrary detentions, torture, enforced disappearance, sexual violence, exploitation, and trafficking within Africa. By this year, the number of people intercepted was at least 60,000. Occasionally, the Libyan Coast Guard has even been known to violently interrupt NGO rescue missions. In 2016, one of these clashes, which was partially caught on camera, involved the LCG boarding an overcrowded dinghy, beating people and causing the boat to rupture. The Sea-Watch NGO managed to pull most of the migrants out of the water, but estimates were that at least 25 people had drowned. And after a spike in detentions and detention-related abuses in Libya, the memorandum was renewed in early 2020. Part 5. The pull factor. The idea of a pull factor is essentially that NGOs were encouraging people to make the journey over when they otherwise didn't have to. My first thought is to wonder how practical this is. The idea that people would make a split decision to sell their belongings, jump on a shaky little dinghy boat and risk drowning on the chance that they might be saved is, I don't know. But we don't need to get into that because we can just look at the evidence she gives.
Like, I don't think those boats should be going through the Mediterranean. I think that people are drowning because of that, and they should probably have a policy similar to Australia, where they're like, no, you go through the proper refugee migrant process. Otherwise, we get increased drownings. I really think people should look into the data on that because there is a pull factor.
So that's pretty simple, right? The boats were getting stopped, and as a result, less people were drowning. Whether that's a correlation or a causation, we'll find out in a minute, but what she says about the number of deaths is true. The clampdown on NGOs started around 2017 with the Italy-Libya deal, and then with the appointment of Salvini in 2018. Around that time, the number of crossings fell dramatically, as did the number of deaths. That said, this is probably one of the most despicable uses of data manipulation I've ever seen. What she doesn't mention is what happened to the death rate. That's because after the clampdown, the likelihood of people drowning in the central Mediterranean had tripled. Seriously, f*** this guy. This means a couple of things. First, it means that despite the chance of being intercepted and taken to a Libyan detention center, and despite a 1 in 20 chance of drowning, some people were desperate enough to make the journey anyway. And second, it also means that the people trying to stop NGO boats because of a pull factor are kind of implicitly saying that death is a reasonable deterrent for refugees. But we should look at the pull factor theory because the dates don't match up. In 2013, the number of crossings was already rising dramatically before there was any rescue response. Mare Nostrum was only put into place shortly after the Lampedusa shipwreck at the end of the year. When it was terminated, the death rate skyrocketed for the first half of 2015 until the NGOs started in May. So at both stages, the search and rescue missions were a response to an increase in crossings, not the other way around. And the life-saving capacities of NGOs is very easily demonstrated. You can see in this graph that the correlation between NGOs and death rates is strikingly negative. But you can see again, even when NGOs went on their annual winter break, people chose to cross anyway. The real problem with the pull factor is that it only tells a fraction of the story. For example, how could we explain this spike in 2011? Was there a sudden deployment of rescue vessels? Or was it because this was the year of the first Libyan civil war? The answer is B, of course, but that war only lasted 8 months. What about the second spike in 2014? That was because of Mare Nostrum, right? Or was it because that was when the second Libyan civil war started? This is the problem you run into again and again when you try to analyze a pull factor. On top of that, you have varying movements from different countries. So from 2015 to 2016, Syrians mostly stopped using the Mediterranean crossing, but only because the Balkan route in the east had temporarily reopened. At the same time, the number of migrants from Eritrea had halved, whilst numbers from Nigeria nearly doubled. You can't explain that with a pull factor. The reason for this was an outbreak of radical Islamist violence in northern Nigeria that led to the displacement of over 2 million people. Then another report pointed out a 46% increase in crossings in the western Mediterranean in 2016, when there were no NGOs in the area. The same report also looks at the peak stage in 2016. There were 12 NGO vessels present at this time, but again, this isn't the whole story. At the same time, the main smuggling hub in Libya had moved to a town called Sabratha, which was controlled by militias. This briefly put the smuggling business under militia control, which meant a couple of things. First, they had more resources which enabled more intense movements of people, and second, the smugglers were now in a bargaining position where they could degrade the quality of the boats and increase the crowding, whilst the customers had no way to complain. The result was that more people were crossing in more crowded and less safe boats, meaning the need for NGOs was more urgent. The point is, there have been studies trying to find a pull factor from Mediterranean rescue missions, and they basically conclude that there isn't one. Instead, they suggest that the main incentives are weather conditions and the political climate at home. In other words, the push factor. It turns out that people aren't really fleeing extreme poverty, war, and persecution because there's an increased chance they'll get rescued. No, their reasons for fleeing are the extreme poverty, war, and persecution. Who'da thunk it? Part 6. The New Lauren Southern. Question mark. Before the Borderless documentary, Lauren's content mostly focused on the impact refugees and migrants had on the locals. It was the Great Replacement theory, the no-go zones, that really weird video where she films a bunch of brown people in Paris and nothing happens. From around 2019, her approach shifted, and based on her recent interactions, it seems to have stayed that way. One of her lead-up videos to Borderless is even called Changing My Mind on Immigration, which Lauren apparently sends to people when they challenge her views.
And that, Changing My Mind on Immigration. Did that 3 years ago. That title. And I'll tell you right now, 99% of the people criticizing me haven't seen that video either. Someone making an accusation of me, I send them the link to the video, and every time it's useless. I'll even DM these people sometimes and be like, here, watch this, please. And they tell me, f*** off.
I find this video a bit weird because I don't really see much of a change. She still talks about her fear of demographic shifts.
But these incidents, while horrifying, are only symptoms of an underlying problem. It is a broader demographic change that brings with it not only the most visible, violent stuff, but the more insidious, creeping changes.
The degradation of European cities.
But for the people who live in Paris, it has become a dangerous, dirty, and hostile city.
The casting away of European culture.
Many here will know too well the jokes we can no longer tell, the words we can no longer use, the characters or shows and songs that have been cast on the pyre of political correctness. But even the loss of these things pales in comparison to what we are casting away in our pursuit of political correctness, namely our culture, our history, our future, our security.
She doesn't really describe Europe as being conquered anymore, which is awesome.
What happens when you get a Muslim majority in France? What happens when you get a Muslim majority in London? You have these places that are literally being conquered.
I'll link this video in the description if you don't believe me, but really the only change I could see was an aesthetic one. The way she does this is by moving some of her focus away from Europe and towards the refugees. She goes to Paris and interviews people who were sleeping rough after they were unable to claim asylum. She does correctly point out that a lot of people will arrive here with no documents, only to end up in a legal grey zone. What she doesn't mention is how this might be more of a reflection on the EU states, given that the UN Convention on Refugees does highlight the obligation to assist people who don't have travel documents, but whatever. Then there's the very obvious selection bias. If you look for migrants in the streets, you're going to find the ones who ended up on the streets. The ones who were not granted asylum. But those are the only ones she wants you to see.
You're looking only for migrants people or for, illegal migrant people?
Illegals, yes. Oh, there's a bunch of tents under. Oh shit, that's a whole tent area down there. All right, hopefully we will have some very happy migrants.
Fortunately, when Lauren was filming this scene for Borderless, she was also being filmed for a documentary called White Noise. And that means we get to see a few of the interviews that she chose to leave out of her production. Of course, the guy who makes the cut is the one who says he misses home.
Does he miss his home country?
Mali me manque beaucoup. Depuis les premiers jours que je suis au Mali, tu vois, non, le Mali me manque. Surtout le parcours que j'ai fait, je viens. C'est une erreur. C'est une grande erreur.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Big help.
That's the humanist spin there. Keep the boats out because it's the best thing for them as well as for us. That wouldn't have worked if she'd shown you this guy instead.
Would you ever go back?
For now, I don't think I want to go back for now because my life is in danger, that's why.
Right.
Obviously, this guy was kept out of Lauren's film. What we never hear about in this documentary is the story of people who had their asylum claims accepted and are now living a good life in Europe. When she does mention them, for example in Ireland, where rates of refugee acceptance are quite high, she pivots straight back to the old Lauren and only gives the opinions of cherry-picked locals. Locals who have opinions like this.
It was misrepresented to the people of the town, and that a lot of the migrants who are living in it are not they're economic migrants rather than genuine people who are oppressed or something of that nature. I don't know whether that's really true or not, but that is a commonly held belief.
Well, I'm sold. Although she does also interview an Irish journalist on the issue. By journalist, I mean disgraced anti-vax conspiracy theorist who thinks the Troubles were staged. Like, all of it.
Were the Troubles an entire staged event? It's quite possible, including some of the bombings that took place in the UK. So, because we really now have learned so much from our history that most of these major events in history were set up by this cabal who are setting up this pandemic.
Remember, this is the documentary that Lauren wishes more people had seen. But this is where you find out that these approaches aren't all that different. Before Borderless, the argument was that refugees shouldn't come because they'll outbreed the locals, they'll create no-go zones, they'll undermine European culture. Now, it's that they shouldn't come because the EU governments will make sure no one is there to save them when they drown, the Libyan Coast Guard will intercept them and take them to detention centres, and if they go to Europe, the EU governments will bypass international law and treat them like shit. I suppose if you change the wording, that second one definitely has a more humanitarian aesthetic. It appears sympathetic to refugees, and a lot of racists were probably very angry at Lauren for doing that. But of course, racist people are idiots. What they didn't notice is that the subtext behind these two approaches is exactly the same. What they both ultimately say to refugees is don't come. And to the EU states, the policy prescription is also the same. It's ignore international refugee laws, use bogus investigations to stop the rescuers from doing their jobs, start describing countries that are riddled with human rights abuses as safe ports, make deals with those countries in exchange for them brutally policing your borders for you. Anything you can do to make sure they don't come.
Do not come. Do not come.
But this is the thing with using deterrence against refugees. The international law is simple enough. If you want refugee status, all you can really do is turn up and claim asylum. It doesn't matter if you don't have your visa, or if you turned up in nice clothes, or if you didn't make the most dangerous journey on Earth with your wife and kids for extremely obvious reasons. And it absolutely doesn't matter whether or not you turned up on a plane or on a raft made out of sea turtles. It's your right as a human being. It makes sense that people like Salvini are resorting to all these insane measures because really, it's all they have. All they can do is be as performatively cruel to refugees and NGOs as possible to try and stop them making the journey, and it hasn't worked. Because after all the seizures, all the investigations, all the dodgy as fuck shenanigans of Italian and Libyan governments, people are choosing to make the journey anyway. The number of crossings from 2019 to 2020 more than doubled, and this year, they've gone up by a third. If there's anything we can learn from the recent footage at Kabul airport, it's the fundamental flaw of deterrence. People will literally hang on to the wheels of planes if they have to. Because unless you can make the refugee process more unpleasant than life in a failed state, people are going to leave. No amount of anti-humanitarian leapfrogging is going to stop that. And Lauren, if you have found your way here, hi. Look, I hate leftists sometimes. Mostly I hate the way people with platforms who should really know better just seem to come at you with all these ham-fisted accusations, but mostly I hate that because it makes it very easy for you to avoid criticism. But we both know that you don't just get let off the hook because you didn't shoot any flares. What you did and what you were trying to achieve was an act of insanity. And the fact that you are still so adamantly trying to defend it is, frankly, it's interesting. And I'm going to put my cards on the table here and say, you didn't do this because of bad information or because of some whimsical ignorance of international law. Maybe a better question to ask would be, if you knew the NGOs were all acting perfectly within their rights, would you have been against them anyway? Of course you would have. Drownings, trafficking, biochemical niqabs, none of these really mattered to you, did they? And they definitely didn't matter to Generation Identity. They're proxy issues. Proxy issues that you use to waste people's time because it's just bad form these days to say there are too many brown people coming to white country. But I could be wrong. And if you really do plan on just going forward as some kind of moderate, both sides conservative, then honestly, I wish you all the best. I'm all for the idea of reasonable conservatives. Counterpoints is cool. But what you did, and the arguments you're making to try and defend it, are not just conservatism. Did you successfully stop the boats? No. They probably would have been stopped anyway, but the point is that you tried. You got what you wanted, and now we've seen the consequences. And I'm sure there are plenty of other things you have to answer for, but, you know, this would be a start. And while I have you here, I don't mean this so much as advice rather than just a request. Don't do what Tommy Robinson did. In 2015, he did a very similar rebranding project of his own. He left the EDL, joined an anti-extremist think tank where they shaved him, put him in a suit, got him to speak slowly and say things like,
I don't want for 1 minute for you to think I'm tarring all Muslims as bad. I'm just giving you a projected view of my life. I want you to understand the stories that have happened.
And of course, it was all optics. None of his ideas had changed, and within 2 years, he was back to screaming in people's faces in front of court buildings, fighting people, defaming a 15-year-old Syrian refugee. Fucking thumb-shaped piece of shit. He's bankrupt now, and I think he tried to claim asylum in the US. You can be better than that. Honestly, I'm mostly okay with your new videos now. Your subscribers have responded to them accordingly, but there's a kind of innocence to them. Like this one where you tried to do some gotcha comparing pro-lockdown leftists to the lumpen proletariat, even though the definitions were kind of sketchy and you couldn't even say the word properly.
You are literally the Lupin proletariat. For those of you who don't know, the Lupin proletariat is a group in Marxist thought that describes people who are supposed to be a part of the working class but were so stupid.
I mean, this kind of thing might not get you the same viewership as before, but it does mean that any future rescue workers in the Mediterranean can at least live in peace without being harassed by some deranged, swashbuckling pirate lady, and I consider that a good start.
Would you ever go back?
For now, I don't think I want to go back for now because my life is in danger, that's why.
Right. Does he miss his home country?
Mali me manque beaucoup. Depuis le premier jour que je suis quitté.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Big help.
Are they refugees? I can't sit here and lie to you and pretend that they were.
Karma, police, arrest this girl, her Hitler hairdo is making me feel ill, and we have crashed her party. This is what you get. This is what you get. This is what you get when you mess with us. And for a minute there, I lost myself. I lost myself. And for a minute there, I lost myself. I lost